In Quest for Glory 2, the sands hold buried secrets. This RPG adventure hybrid from 1990 is a beloved classic of the genre. Players spend hours uncovering its shadowy streets and the mysteries hidden in the dunes. But some take it further. A select group of speedrunners have mastered the game, bending time and space itself to their will. Today, join me for the history of Quest for Glory 2 Any Percent Speedruns. What are you supposed to do in this game? Like, what is it like when you're not speedrunning it?
Basically, the deal is you just became a hero in the first game, and some of your friends from the first game are like, hey, come help us in our hometown of Shapir. That is basically being besieged by an evil wizard who is sending magical elemental monsters to attack the city based on the classical elements.
Fire, air, earth, and water. And after that, you find out, whoa, okay, it wasn't just the elements. Somebody was actually in charge of those elements. And there's a sister city to Shapir called Raseir. And you have to go fight the big bad that's there. And once you fight the big bad there, you have saved the day and are ready to go to Quest for Glory 3.
Quest for Glory 2 takes heavily from 1001 Arabian Nights. Like, it's all that lore sort of remixed.
I think that was right on the cusp of them trying to do more things with the technology of the engine. So they had turning animations, they had mouse movement as well as keyboard movement. They had, you could click on things to look at them, but you could also use the parser to look at them.
Quest for Glory 2 was very charming and alive. You felt that going around the city. The graphical style was top-notch.
But the game is not without its challenges. One of the most common frustrations is the city layout. It has a lot of twisty streets, and although there is an in-game fast travel map you can buy, you have to at least make it to the money changer before you can even do that.
To be honest, I think the first time I beat it, I didn't even know about the map. So, I mean, that really tainted my experience. Like, this just becomes a very tedious mess if you don't have the map layout. That is undeniably one of the things that keeps people away from that game.
Some of the controls are also a little awkward for speedrunners.
It's clunky and weird because every change of direction, you have to stop to turn around. The text boxes, dialogue boxes, have to be on screen for just long enough before you can close them. Every screen change puts the mouse cursor at the bottom right side of the screen, and I can't imagine how they even did that, but that makes it impossible to pre-select screen positions in the game. At a micro level, the game fights you every step of the way, and if you do a lot of runs, it can be really maddening.
We can't talk about the early history of Quest for Glory 2 speedruns without talking about Mr. P.R. Miller.
Mr. Miller he's a legendary Quest for Glory runner. I believe he's really the backbone of the community. He's incredibly fast, and he's also impressive in that he can stream and he can talk about what he's doing and he can joke around and still be incredibly fast.
I really wanted to run the entire series. I absolutely did. I knew I could do 4 because that's where I started. I had just finished with 1 and I said, you know what? I'm going to have to bite the bullet. I might as well do 2, and I'm not looking forward to it. I wonder if anybody has done 2.
The only existing runs at the time were by Purry Purry, an any percent wizard run with a time of 25:30, and an any percent thief run with a time of 27:38.
This was my least favorite of the 5 whenever I started. And then after watching Purry Purries and realizing, oh my gosh, there's not a lot that you have to do in this game, it took all of the anxiety of running this game out. By and large, the any percent really is just a modified, well, until recently, it was just a modified version of what Purry did, trimmed down to minimum stats with optimizations in every single which way and direction. With that in mind, though, his run has a lot of typos, a lot of excessive buying. But when you look at what he did in about something like, 23, 25 minutes, that blew my mind. I did not think that that was going to be possible.
One strategy that Puri Puri used was the infamous sell beard glitch.
There is a magic shop in this game. It's run by a gnome. His name is Keep On Laughing. Another pun. Not a fan. But the beautiful part about him is that he has a quest. And what that quest says is there's a dervish who's out in the desert. And if you go out into the desert and get this dervish's beard and sell him this beard, this is like a magical component. This is a really big thing. He'll pay you 15 dinar. And normally it's supposed to be a one thing and done. Like you collect the beard, you sell it, you can't do it anymore. Well, the game's code never actually checks to see A, if you've had the beard, and B, even after you've had it, it keeps giving you the monetary reward. So all you have to do is just get to the magic shop right away and just type in sell beard. And each time you get 15 gold, infinite money right off the bat. Breaks the entire economy.
Runners wouldn't have to navigate through the windy, twisty, confusing streets to find the money changer. They could just go to the magic shop, which is a few screens north of the starting area, sell beards, and then come right back to buy a map from Ali Chica.
That made it very accessible, because if you could sell a beard and get a map right away, you were in much better shape. Like just being able to quick bring up a map was just so much better.
In 2015, Mr. P.R. Miller earned a 1958. He begins by running to the magic shop to sell beards. He then buys all the items necessary to defeat the elementals. After that, he buys a map from Ali Chica so that he can fast travel. He sleeps until the fire elemental shows up, then puts it in a lamp. He does the same for the other elementals, sleeping until they arrive, and then dealing with them. After that, Miller travels to Raseir and waits for his room to open at the inn. He gives the emir's daughter, Zaisha, his clothes and visa. This lets her escape the city, but it means we can't leave. Miller then gets thrown in a dungeon, escapes, and gets captured by Adavis, the evil wizard. Miller enters the Forbidden City and goes through several element-themed rooms. He meets the Jinni, who teleports Miller to the palace for the final showdown with Adavis. And at the time, that was what the run looked like.
I was really happy with that run at the time. At the time, I was like, yes, all right. Definitely, we're getting through the series now. This feels good. We're pretty good. I just didn't realize all the mistakes that I had made. I was kind of an island at that point. Puri wasn't really actively running it at that point anymore. And the Discord didn't exist. So the speedrun.com page didn't exist. There was nothing.
Even if there had been other runners, Quest for Glory 2 had a big issue that made it unappealing. After you defeat the elementals in Shapir, you take the caravan to Raseir, the sister city across the desert. And Raseir has a pretty big annoyance for speedrunners.
The Raseir wait is like the main thing that stopped people from continuing to grind this run and kind of keeps a lot of new players away.
The city of Raseir is just the most appalling piece of adventure game design in the entire series. It ranks just below the 14-minute unskippable wait sequence on the ship in King's Quest III. If you liked waiting for 14 minutes in King's Quest III, come to Raseir. We have 6 more to offer you. The problem is that you arrive in the city of Raseir in mid-afternoon, and the bedroom in the inn is not accessible until evening falls more than 3 minutes later. And you don't have to do anything until the dawn of next day. You're just sitting there.
Nothing to do in the game other than go work on your stats, which I think you were supposed to, but speedrunners don't need that stuff.
Once you reach Raseir, it's a very different kind of dystopian city. Everything's kind of gone straight to crap. There's not the same kind of freedom. The markets are shut down. Water is rationed out to the people. It's really meant to be like kind of like this just tyrannical kind of system. And what you're doing is just waiting for night. Once it's nighttime, you can sleep. Then you go to the next day. The second day, you get hushed into a corner by a servant and then by basically the princess of Raseir, the emir's daughter, Zaisha. And if you give her your visa and your clothes, that actually sets the time ahead further. It brings it closer to sunset, but you still have like a 5-minute-ish wait while you're waiting for night because you can't sleep. But now you can't even leave the city. So there's very little to do on day 28.
And then there's Ferrari's drink, which if you drink it, it will advance some time, but that only takes away 3 hours at best.
Whenever you enter into the inn, you're met by Signor Ferrari. He's a peddler of information, and he knows things. And one of the first things that was discovered during that time period was that your vitality is directly linked to how long you have to wait. It's going to depend on your vitality as to how much information you're giving up. Well, for the purposes of speedrunning, we want low vitality because we want to be able to spend as much time auto-talking to him as possible because that burns through the clock and sets the clock to particular intervals.
Now, there is a game time scale you can set, normal, faster, and fastest, but fastest is approximately twice as fast as normal. So even setting that, you're still looking at 7.5 minutes.
So, despite his best efforts, Miller still had to endure the long waits. And overall, he was still playing the game mostly as intended. Until someone named C-Square started making a tool-assisted speedrun of the game. A tool-assisted speedrun is done on an emulator, frame by frame, with the goal of creating a hypothetical perfect run, something that humans would be incapable of doing. C-Square dug into the code and found some things that were really surprising.
What he came back with was some, at first, minor optimizations, but then he showed me the big skip.
Basically, throughout the game, you have to deal with various elementals in the city. They come out at various times, and you have a certain amount of days to deal with them, and if you don't, they actually destroy the city, and you lose the game.
So here's how the elementals work. The game keeps track of an internal threat level. An even-numbered threat level means that the city is at peace. An odd-numbered threat level means that the city is under attack. Let's run through an example. The threat level starts at 0. On day 5, the game increases the threat level to 1. That's odd, so the city is under attack, this time by the fire elemental. When you defeat an elemental, the game adds 1 to the threat level. So, defeat the fire elemental, and the threat level goes from 1 to 2. 2 is an even number, you're safe. At midnight on days 7, 11, 14, and 16, the game checks the threat level. If it's even, the city is at peace, and the game can continue. But if the threat level is odd, the city succumbs to the elemental's attack, and the game ends. However, using the map to travel eats up time. What C-Square found is this. If you use the map to travel, and your travel takes you over midnight, the code to take you to your destination overrides the code called to end the game. Thus, we can just use the map to skip defeating any elementals at all.
What happens when you travel across the city is the map script calls advance time before it calls new room. Time advances and it calls the game code to transition to elemental destroys the city, but then the map script destroys itself and instead calls new room to wherever you traveled to.
It was way faster than dealing with and buying everything that was necessary in order to actually save the town. We could just warp back and forth and make everybody believe that we had saved the town. It blew the whole run wide open. I mean, shaved 5 minutes off immediately off that run.
Quest for Glory 2 is a game. It's a game about exploring a large Arabian city, of getting lost in winding streets and of having dinner in an inn while listening to the poetry of Omar, and of like filling up your water skins and heading off into the desert to hug a tree. Like there's magic carpets and there's Jinni and there's rideable dinosaurs, and when you arrive in Shapir, Your friends will talk to everybody about all of your heroics in the first game, so everyone knows you as a hero. They treat you as one, you feel like one, and you really do play a hero. So imagine their surprise when you arrive in town and immediately turbo nap in your room for 2 weeks straight while elementals destroy the marketplace.
C-Square also found something that sped up the Raseir wait.
You go into Zaisha's room, and if you don't go in there, you lose the game. You're a hero, you're supposed to help out a lady in distress. You give her your clothes and your visa so she can leave the city.
At that point, you need to wait at the inn until you can sleep, then leave in the morning, get arrested, and thrown in jail. However, there's a faster way to get caught that doesn't involve waiting until night for your room to open up. Just stay where you are.
C-Square found out that if you wait for 3 minutes there, the guards take you, and it is about a 2-minute save right off the bat, just because. 2 to 3 minutes just because.
Just stay in her room and twiddle your thumbs. You've done everything you need to do, and now you get to sit there for 3 minutes and think about how you're going to screw up the endgame.
C-Square also found a way to cut down on the first half of the Raseir wait, but it was TAS only. You see, there's a quirk with the in-game time. If you change screens at the right moment, you'll gradually inch time forward. So this was cool, but it was very precise and not viable for a human. C-Square was using an external tool to watch the in-game clock, something that speedrunners wouldn't have access to. Nonetheless, there were enough strategies developed in the TAS that let Miller drop his time significantly. 1958 to 1434. Paul Robert Miller would then move on from Quest for Glory 2 any percent.
I had kind of moved on to other categories. Again, this was the community just wasn't there yet. Puri had kind of bowed out. He had passed over all of the admin to me for speedrun.com for all of the games. I wasn't really focused on 2 that much. I thought that it was good enough as it was. I wasn't sure how much lower the time could be taken. Haha.
Miller's record would stand for 3 years until davidtki joined the ranks.
David, I think, is the premier community figurehead right now, since Miller is essentially in semi-retirement. And the reason for that is simple. He loves these games more than anyone. I think he'll be here still playing these games when the rest of us have stopped. Because every time that any of us find something interesting, he's usually the first to respond and try to figure out what else can be done with it, especially in relation to collection runs. He's just Quest for Glory personified.
On September 24th, 2020, David would earn a 1421, beating Miller's time by 13 seconds. The run was pretty much the existing route with better execution. But Miller wasn't completely out of the running yet, and he was still finding new strategies.
Any class can use the rope at the palace gates of Raseir. Normally, that's the thief's way in. Well, it turns out you don't even need to know how to climb. You don't even need to be a thief. You don't even have to have the rope in your inventory. If you just use rope, the rope just appears and you just can climb up the rope. So I found that, and I also found log skip. I found that about an hour before one of the Questing for Glory events, where it was like an hour before my run. I was just doing a quick practice run beforehand, and I found another major skip.
And there's normally this log that we're supposed to jump across. But instead of running across, we're actually just going to use strength, and we're going to run across the water. And we're up.
What?
Rather than having to jump on a log and then jump off a log, which is kind of platformy in a point-and-click adventure text box game, not exactly everybody's favorite, you would just completely run right across the water as if it wasn't even there. And it was hiding for like 30 years, and like the fact that like nobody found it was just stunning.
Later, it would be found that you could type unlock instead of use strength to perform the same skip. On February 11th, 2021, Miller would earn a 1358, the world's first sub-14 run. And later that year, runner SwimFan would earn a 1339. How? Well, there's a cutscene you have to watch before joining the caravan to Raseir. And it's long. However, there's a sequence at the start of the caravan where you watch the sunrise. This only plays if you were sleeping until morning at the inn. If you pass the time until after midnight and go when it's still dark out, you skip this sequence. So that's what Miller and David did in early runs. But that means using the map to pass time instead of sleeping, and that's slow. There's also a risk of getting caught up in Omar's poetry on your way out the door.
Shoot.
But here's what SwimFan discovered. If you switch the game detail to low, then the sunrise sequence gets shortened by about 15 seconds. Overall, sleeping at the inn was now faster. But to get the time even lower, the community would need to find more optimizations.
After working on a tool-assisted speedrun for Quest for Glory 1, I discovered a tech that I refer to as parser dumping. SCI is known to pull the keyboard slowly. It's every 100 milliseconds or 10 times per second, and it pauses the game while you're typing things out, so getting the shortest commands is really important. But a tech I discovered working on the tool-assisted speedrun is that during screen transitions, it's still pulling the keyboard. You can make use of that screen transition to type stuff on the keyboard while the screen is loading.
Runners could then repeat that command later with spacebar or the F3 key.
I discovered that for the tool-assisted speedrun, but I only started pulling it out once I started competing with Santa.
What happens when SantaClaus joins?
SantaClaus is probably the best adventure game speedrunner we have right now. He is never satisfied with any run.
Yeah, he is determination and persistence incarnate.
And SantaClaus just came in at the right time. It was just like, you know what we're going to do? We're just going to optimize the heck out of it. He very quickly began to dominate the board, and then it became a battle back and forth for a long time between him and David. And it got so optimized that I will say that the category was just completely intimidating. I'm like, yep, I'm out.
He grinds these things for perfection.
He will get a world record and say this is crap and keep going.
As soon as you take a record from him, he drops everything and he's like, I'm getting this back as soon as I possibly can.
I was familiar with some of Santa's previous runs on other games, particularly Sierra's AGI games, and I'd seen him run some other SCI Zero stuff, and I knew he was grabbing all these records in other communities. But then he comes in and he runs Quest for Glory 2, and he manages to beat the existing 80% record pretty easily. But when I looked at the run, I could see the mistakes. I could see where my execution was better. And I don't know what it was exactly. Somewhere in my mind, I was thinking, you might be really good in these other communities, but this one's not free. I'm going to fight you for it. You're going to have to try harder.
This world record chart makes it look like David was dominating, but Santa was never far behind. And keep in mind, these runs alone took place over a week. Both runners were exceptional talents. In fiction, you'll sometimes get a gamer character who doesn't seem to be a pro at any one specific game, but instead is just a god gamer generally and will excel at anything game-related. In reality, that is David. The man runs PC games from every era and genre. He runs games on every console known to man. And Quest for Glory 2 is a game he's put much more effort into than most.
Like he's amazingly fast and adaptable. And I imagine if he didn't have kids and a job, he would be transcendent. he'd be number one in every single thing. But he's just got to pick his battles, I think.
There came a specific point during mine and Santa's battle for world record when I was looking for ways to save time, and I thought of that time manipulation strat.
Remember this strategy from C-Square's tool-assisted speedrun? The one that C-Square thought wasn't possible for humans?
The clock manip was a time advancement manipulation technique that is intended to very slightly speed up the time that you spend waiting for the bedroom door to open. And, God, I think that manip was just wrought through arcane magics by people who delved into the code of the game.
Every time you do a screen transition, the game does something with the in-game timer.
If the game clock variable is an even value, changing screens increases it by 1. However, if the game clock variable is an odd value, changing screens decreases it by 1.
So that back and forth is done to just tick the game's in-kernel clock slightly ahead.
But the thing is, in order to do it consistently, you have to know both when the clock is going to tick and what value the clock is on.
That's because transitioning on the wrong in-game time unit would inch time backwards instead of forwards. Imagine you're waiting for a bus. What? We don't have any buses? Fine. Imagine you're walking in the desert and you're trying to get somewhere east. There are magic carpets that arrive every second and they can drop you just a little bit further. But every other carpet is heading in the opposite direction. And the carpets are invisible. While there is a command to know the general time of day, there's no way to know the precise in-game time. C-Square used tools to watch the in-game time variable in memory, so how could humans set this up?
There was no setup for it, so I was just transitioning screens randomly and trying to see if I could enter the bedroom slightly sooner than normal. During one of my runs it worked. I saved, 3-4 seconds. It was enough to open the bottle that said, yeah, we're going to start incorporating this into runs. It was also something I was afraid to do because I knew that the second I did that, I was going to lose the battle for world record.
The day after David used the manip for the first time, SantaClaus used the strategy and dropped the world record by about 30 seconds. But it was still based on luck.
Santa and I have very different styles. Santa is more than able to throw hundreds of attempts at something and go for the riskiest stuff, whereas I tend to focus very much on consistent stuff, trying to make sure each run is consistently executable, but I have much fewer attempts to throw at something.
David doesn't like to do long reset-heavy grinds, and generally he doesn't need to. His execution is so consistent even in the hardest parts of the run. He'll only do a handful of attempts, but he makes them count. But that approach stops working if nearly all runs will die to a sheer luck factor 5 minutes in. And I didn't really want to face that either, so we both dived deep into the time manip to make it reliable. They needed a consistent setup, and they found it in the caravan.
So the nice thing about the caravan cutscene is that toward the end of it, it's going to display a couple of text boxes, and those text boxes are on a full second frame rule.
In this case, frame rule is used a little loosely because it doesn't strictly have to do with frames, but what it means is that when the text box shows up, you know that you're at the very beginning of a second and not in the middle of it.
When you enter away those text boxes, you know where the full second frame rule is, but also after the last one, it sets time to a known value, hour 14 on day 27.
Both David and Santa would fine-tune the details of the setup.
So the setup I remember is on the last text box, delay putting it away by 1.3 seconds. 8.7 seconds since putting away the last text box press up to enter the alleyway. 10.5 seconds, press up again to move forward in the alleyway. And then around 14 seconds or so, press diagonal down to screen transition in the Fountain Plaza, and press down every second on the second until about 2.5 minutes have passed.
And so you actually have like a separate timer that is separate from the splits that you have to figure out the 1.3, etc.
Yeah, that's correct. There's a caveat to this, which is that the clock does something on the hour every hour.
Okay. Remember, we want to change screens on even-numbered time values because those inch time forward, and not odd-numbered time values because those make time go backwards. Every hour on the hour, the game does this adjustment even if you're not transitioning screens. If you transition at the hour, time gets adjusted twice instead of once. So if you don't account for that, time is now odd, and every screen transition moves it backwards.
It causes me to need to skip a beat, delay an additional second at 54, 144, and if I go that long, 234 on the clock.
Gotcha. So you are you are opening up a second timer, but then also having to account for a timer delay. This sounds so. To an outsider, this sounds insane.
That's because it's insane.
I spent so long learning, and then I see Santa, and I see especially David. Like he tries it like 3 times, and he's like, "Yeah, I got it. No problem. No problem. I got it."
In the alley, stop for a while, then push 8. About 9.9 seconds after splitting. Why about? What?
Yeah, I know.
I'm lucky if I stop my timer on time at the end of the run.
Yeah, me too.
Man, that is like that. No, I'm not getting back into this race. I don't have patience for this anymore.
Approximately how much time does the time warp strat save?
A little over a minute. Probably about 1 minute, 10 seconds.
That is significant and nutty.
Yeah, and I'm glad I opened that bottle because the results were amazing.
From February 28th to March 12th of 2022, Santa and David put up 17 new world records. They were tied for first place.
I mean, the whole time I knew it was a losing battle because I was going to burn out first. There was no question about that. Not in my mind.
And part of that was because of another wrinkle to the time manipulation strategy. A little game variable that spelled doom for speedrunners.
So I mentioned before the thing about having to account for the time, the clock doing weird things every hour on the hour. The thing is, I have to talk a little bit about how game time scale works, because it's not just ticking through the time twice as quickly. It's alternating +1 and +3 each second.
So, as the clock ticks on the fastest speed setting, it alternates between +1 and +3, and the game has to keep track of which one comes next. The variable that keeps track of this is called Global 194. And according to SantaClaus, Global 194 is the variable of doom, because there's no way to track it, at least any way that's currently viable for speedrunners. So you don't know whether +1 or +3 is coming next at any given moment. Remember, if you land exactly on the hour, transitioning screens will start inching time backwards instead of forwards. But because of Global 194 and the way the math works out, there's a 50-50 chance of time being offset so that you'll skip over the exact hour. So, instead of pausing, you could keep changing screens and push time just a little bit further. On the other hand, there's a 50% chance that you do land on the hour, which would throw everything off. This isn't something you could know, and that's why Global 194 is so deadly.
So, Depending on where you're at, there's a possibility that you won't land on the hour at all. Which means, if you're lucky, you could just keep going and hope that the clock did not hit the hour.
And there's another place where Global 194 matters as well. Remember that you can only enter your room in Raseir at night. If you have a bad Global 194, time skips over the trigger for night, and you can't get into your room. You lose about 7 to 8 seconds because you have to leave the inn and re-enter. For casual players, this would merely be annoying. For speedrunners, it meant that half the runs would die. So how to deal with this? Some early manip runs kept the manip going longer than necessary to guarantee it would be night, which costs a couple seconds. But eventually, runners would take their chances. And the way that time lines up, the coin flip at the inn was the same coin flip at the Fountain Plaza. Get one, and you're on track to get the other.
The YOLO manip does not try to save it at the hour. It just keeps going and hopes that things line up the correct way. But if this works out, I could gain anywhere from 2 to 6 seconds.
It was a roughly 50-50 chance. That was one of the things that made it more difficult for me to keep up, was because I was consistently missing that 50-50.
But eventually, David's determination would pay off. On July 16th of 2022, he got the YOLO manip. However, as David himself would say,
"This endgame is not free. There's so much that can go wrong here." Ooh, got it! That's it.
it was a new world record by 2 seconds. David felt he couldn't push the time any further, especially with having to go for the YOLO manip every time. He was done with the category. Battling him for world record gave me enormous respect for David, and made me a better runner. The challenge from David showed me I still had a very long way to go. I learned a lot from him, and leveled up plenty, but I still wouldn't dream of claiming that I'm better than David. And it didn't take too long for Santa to catch up. An 11:25 on September 15th, followed by an 11:24 the same day. But of course, Santa wasn't done yet, and he was about to crack the game open even wider because
Santa found a different and better setup for the time warp, which was harder to do but could result in faster times. The earlier time warps went to the Fountain Plaza and pressed down once each second, and that was easier to do. But you also had to travel all the way to the Fountain Plaza. There was a faster setup, but more difficult to do, more tight on the timing, where you could enter the alleyway from the Gateway Plaza, come back out to the Gateway Plaza, go back in again, and keep doing that. And I never got good at it.
SantaClaus was the runner who came up with the final version of the time manip, and he dubbed it the Wow Wow manip. That was the biggest lump of coal that he ever put in our stocking, but I'll be damned if it isn't useful.
Do you know what that means, what it stands for? I don't know the game well enough to understand. What does Wow Wow mean?
Wow Wow means, wow, this is a bullshit skip, and wow, this is tight, and if you mess it up, you're screwed. I think that's it. I think he just named it for that.
Actually, as Santa explains in his own words, I call this one the Wow Wow manip because, number 1, it's pretty wow. 2, it's the secret sauce that makes a time in the 11:10s viable. 3, it will explode and kill you if not handled with care. And 4, it's very definitely the last manip we'll ever use. Not only was the Wow Wow faster, it also solved the Global 194 problem. Remember how there was a 50-50 chance of not being able to get into your room at the inn? Well, the way that time lines up with the Wow Wow, if you switch from the fastest timescale to the faster timescale at the right moment, you'll always be able to enter your room. If you time it right, the worst that can happen is you lose 1 second from a bad global 194. So the Wow Wow was great, but it was a lot harder.
Not only is the window tighter to make, but at least on my timer, you can't press down on the second every second. You have to do down 0.8 seconds after a thing and then up 0.2 seconds, but you also have to know when to do the delay in there, and there's more math involved and it's not as easy to do.
That's the Wow Wow manip. It's absolute nonsense.
Santa would continue to drop his time with the Wow Wow manip, going from 11:22 on September 18th to 11:18 on September 23rd. Along the way, he had help from an accidental discovery by SwimFan. Normally, at this point in Raseir, there's a cutscene with a character named Ugarte. Then, one screen later, there's a short animation of a few guards exiting the square. You can't move at this time, and you have to wait for them to leave. But on this run, SwimFan didn't see the second animation for some reason. What happened is that SwimFan had put his cursor on top of Ego, the player character. This made the cursor flicker and made the game lag. Because of the way the game keeps track of these scenes, the slowdown made the second one not play. But this was unreliable. Eventually, Santa found that if you lag the game and double press escape, the delay is just enough to work nearly all the time. It saves about 1.5 seconds.
But all of that aside, the run at the time was absolutely dominated by the Wow Wow manip. And looking at it in Discord, when I started learning this run, just makes your eyes glaze over. I couldn't get it for days. It really was the main thing that would turn people off and prevent them from ever doing a speedrun on the game. It's just dumb.
That's Kane, a speedrunner who began his Quest for Glory speed journey in the fall of 2022. So what made you want to start speedrunning the Quest for Glory games?
Well, there's this YouTuber who is trying to cash in on all of the money and fame and girls that adventure game speedrunners get on a daily basis. He made a video about the Quest for Glory 1 speedrun and all of the Herculean exemplars that run that game, and I wasn't sure that speedrunning a parser game could be all that fun, but I distinctly remember saying to myself, the speedrun is 1 minute long. Whatever happens, it won't be too much of a time sink. Yesterday, I was practicing frame-perfect animation canceling in Quest for Glory 4, so you tell me how that went.
I think Kane may be, pound for pound, the best speedrunner of Quest for Glory. And listen, davidtki is the other guy in the running for that. And his numbers will probably show that davidtki is the best. But man, when you put Kane, when you sit Kane on a run, insanity.
He's been a wonderful addition to the community. He kind of broke a whole bunch of things open and also showed, hey, there's somebody who can compete with Santa and myself.
On the 20th of November 2022, this was my birthday, in fact. I had just had a lovely cake, and I sat down, and I finally started trying to pick this game apart. Throughout the entire day, I discovered, let's just say, a number of things which are now how the game is kind of run. I wasn't recording that. What the heck was that? What? What the heck? I was so astonished. I was flabbergasted by the fact that I could just go out of bounds randomly.
Kane had accidentally discovered turning isn't walking.
Turning isn't walking is a concept I first heard about in this one YouTuber's video. It was the ScumVM developer Sluicebox who initially mentioned it, trying to figure out how it's possible in King's Quest VI to move over certain script triggers. The animations in the various SCI games all essentially have a stop command.
For instance, if you're walking and play the flute, stop walking first. Otherwise, you'll be sliding all over the place and it'll look funny. But turning isn't walking, so tell your character to move in a way that starts with a turn. Like, let's say you're facing right and move to the left. You have to turn around first. If you start an animation in the middle of a turn, the game says, oh, you're turning, not walking, so we don't have to stop your movement. When the turn completes, you keep moving even though you're not supposed to. This also overrides the script triggers that were supposed to happen along the way. And because King's Quest VI and Quest for Glory 2 use roughly the same engine, you can do the same trick in both. Like this.
The thing about Ali Chica is that every time you buy an item from him, he goes through this obnoxiously long rummaging animation. And that takes a while, and you're rooted in place while he does this. I discovered that if you, instead of buying the map from him, if you bargain for the map, if you haggle map, then he initially has a text box about the haggling before he starts the rummaging animation. So if you input that, then begin turning around, and then mash away his initial text box so that he starts rummaging, the animation is going while you're turning around. And because turning isn't walking, you can start moving right away. And we go to the inn, which is where we want to go anyway, and we have the map at the end of that. We don't have to stand there and watch him rummage and then give you the map.
Awesome. Okay, so you figured out some turning isn't walking for that part when you're buying the map. What else?
Well, this is where things start to get interesting. The next thing I do is I look for some turning isn't walking stuff in the cave. You can cast spells in this game, and the spells all have a little animation. Most of them actually just halt your movement entirely, except for the projectile spells. The projectile spells can be used to trigger turning isn't walking. So I did this first, where I was trying to cross the this downside part of the cave. It didn't work, but this is the idea of it, where you can begin to see that I'm sliding across terrain.
Got it. Okay, yes. So you're getting it, but there's still a boundary there that you can't
You
cross.
you see what I'm doing, and I'm trying this on various screens in the game.
Kane next set his sights on the lava room, a particularly dangerous part of the run. You mentioned that this is a really annoying and dangerous part. What makes it annoying and dangerous?
Look at it.
The fire room is one of the deadliest rooms in the game. You've got a really short kind of walkway to get through. It's a maze. There's fire billowing. There's lava everywhere. So you've got the short platform, and you can only walk over certain places at certain times. It killed a lot of runs.
If you're anywhere near those, when they spew out lava, you actually just stop and you do an animation of you like patting yourself down, and then you stop and you stand there for 5 seconds. We don't got that kind of time. You can even get hit by chain reactions, and you're just stuck there for 10, 12 seconds. It's a nightmare. I was practicing that one for about a day before I really started looking at the game more. I wanted a skip for this. That was like the holy grail at the time. I wanted to not have to do Lava Lake. And then the following happens, and volume warning. Okay?
Kane used turning isn't walking, also known as spell sliding or spell gliding, to glide over the lava damage trigger.
And that's the first instance where turning isn't walking skipped a very difficult part of the game that everyone hated and was a genuine run killer.
This skip became known as lava is floor.
All the lava is actually walkable. The contact with the lava only really happens on the edges. Once you're in the lava, you can walk around as if it's just regular floor. While using spell slide, you actually skip over the trigger for whether or not you're going to burn yourself, and you just go to the end of the screen. And that entire west wall is a screen transition. So it doesn't matter where you go on there.
That used to be the reset point of the run, that fire room. Because you just make the tiniest mistake, you get stuck, you're dead. But now, thanks to Kane, no more.
And what's really funny about all of this? Mr. PR Miller had accidentally discovered turning isn't walking 2 years earlier. He just didn't notice it. And it was only when Kane went looking at old runs that anyone noticed. After finding Fire Lake Skip, Kane would start to look for other ways to use turning isn't walking, like this.
By spell gliding on the log room, you can glide across the river, so you don't have to jump on the log, and you don't have to do what we used to have to do. You could actually type unlock when you were on the right side of the river, and you would actually run across the river, and then you would begin the process of breaking the hole that's sucking in air that's preventing you from moving forward. But that's an animation, and it takes a while to go through.
So spell gliding was faster, but it still meant that you had to loop around from the entrance to the exit.
The problem there is that you have to go to the left and then cross back over on the top side and then enter the lava room from above. However, there's an oversight in the game. When you first enter and the lamp is not lit, the entire room is in absolute darkness. When the room is in darkness, the geometry of the room is actually different. But you can't actually really do anything with it because it also locks your movement. And throughout the game, keyboard movement is always the most optimal way to go through it. It's actually faster than mouse movement. We don't know why. So you would come to this screen and you would just get locked at the entrance. You couldn't move. If you tried to do anything other than light the lamp, the game would just essentially chide you and say, well, you're basically lost in here. You can't move. You can't see anything. Just light the lamp. It basically tells you flat out what you need to do. You can't move, but you can. They forgot to lock the mouse. What you can do is do this. Watch where it's coming from. See that? Hey, look! And we're through. Alright, so... I need to do a run.
Initially, Kane thought that you had to do turning isn't walking to get to the upper platform. But SantaClaus discovered that it was much simpler than that. You just needed to left click.
All you have to do is press the left mouse button to move. And nobody noticed for years. They just didn't try mouse because you're using keyboard in this game. It's insane.
This meant that runners no longer had to run across the river or deal with the wind, and it was dead easy.
There's no challenge to it. There's no risk to using it. There's no way that you could screw this skip up. You just click once, wait a second, and then light your lamp and continue. It's just brilliant in its simplicity.
So we found Cave Skip. And we don't have to go through the cave. It saves like 10 seconds. And not having to go through the Fire Lake and its Lake of Doom saves probably 5. So 15 seconds basically means that sub 11 was suddenly possible. By these two things alone, sub 11 was possible. And the grind began almost immediately. And then it was just a matter of, can Santa de-rust before I could get going fully? Because I hadn't yet learned the wow manip when I started grinding. I found all of this, and the wow manip was still an esoteric arcane bullshit magic thing to me. And it was only really the next day when it started clicking. So we had 3 days, me and Santa, after figuring out how all of this worked, of trying to push the record down. And Santa kept getting closer and closer and closer. And ultimately, he got COVID. He only could do a few runs a day. And then he just went to bed. I think he got an 11 minute dead. And then he just said, I was so close. I'm going to bed. I feel like crap. And I just said, okay, I'll try not to break the record when you're sleeping. And damn it, that's what I did. And I got the 10:59, the very first sub 11. Basically, while he was asleep, which still feels like a dick move.
Santa would tie Kane's 1059 the very next day, but he wouldn't stop there.
I got 1059 and 1058 and 1057, but then it dried up. I streamed for multiple hours every day trying to push it further, but I've never been that stuck in any run. I would get good paces, but something always went wrong. Quest for Glory 2 is a cursed game.
And then, on December 7th, SantaClaus earned this run.
It was a best pace ever run, pretty much throughout. It had a perfect Wow Wow, followed by a perfect Ferrari, followed by a good Global 194. After that, it was just me against nerves. I still think it was probably my best executed adventure game run. It was definitely the only time I've been so completely stuck and unable to improve my time, for which Kane and David receive much credit. They're incredibly talented runners, and we all pushed it and ourselves to that level together in a way that would have never happened without competition.
The actual 1054, if you look at it now, is kind of crazy. He hits every frame rule. Do you know how hard that is?
Well, actually, you probably don't. When the player tells the game how long to sleep at the inn, there's a brief sleep animation. This animation finishes whenever the next second on your computer's system clock rolls over. So that means if you're not fast enough, you might lose the better part of a second.
You basically have no time to waste anywhere to hit the first map skip's frame rule. You have to navigate optimally. You have to open the map optimally. You have to click all teleports basically as soon as the map appears. And if you click even one frame too early, it cancels the map opening. Finally, you have to go back to bed and select sleep optimally. It's a very action-packed 15-second sequence with perhaps a couple tenths of total time you can spare to lose over multiple failure points.
He's just a machine when it comes to, when he wants a record, he's going for it, and he's not gonna stop.
By this point, Kane started to get burnt out by the game and moved on to Quest for Glory 3.
I was kind of sick of 2 by then because of all the clunkiness I've mentioned. There is so much detail that I love in the rest of the speedrun. How you can do the Fire Lake now is very fun. How you do the parser jumping where you're typing in texts during screen transitions. It's all these little details that are genuinely fun to pull off. And then you just sit there and wait. The run is dominated by the sequence where you're running into a room and then out of it again for 2.5 minutes, and then sitting in a room for 3.
If only there were a way to skip those waits.
The thought of staring at Zaisha's room kept me from committing to any more runs. I wanted more skips, and fortunately I wasn't alone. Swimfan was also looking for them, and he's fantastic. We had a few ideas. One was the magic map. If we could find a way to open the map outside of Shapir, we could warp to any Shapir location, but we didn't find one. The other was the Raseir Palace, which was very promising. The palace is the endgame area, and you can get to it as soon as you enter Raseir. If you could glitch through the door, or no-clip up to the balcony, you could go straight to the final showdown. We spent dozens of hours looking at glitches on the palace screen alone. We never found one, and I largely despaired. Hi, bird. But then Swimfan looked in the one place that I had largely discounted.
Was there anything in particular that made you want to come back to this and try to find what you found?
Yeah, it was a For the glory quest, I was questing for my own glory. Essentially, I was like, if I could do this, I'd be a hero to several people.
Swimfan was looking for a way around the time manip, and he found the solution in the burning desert sands. The desert is bounded to the north and the south by mountains. Runners knew from using debug commands that going to unintended desert rooms made the game act funny. So maybe, if they could get past the mountains, they could find something useful. But how?
There is a often ignored battle with Merv the Griffin, who is basically a test of your niceness in the game. Like, you're supposed to get a griffin feather from him, but you want to do it in a heroic way that's not murdering him. So most players, if they do anger him, you get in a fight that's very, very difficult, and you probably die and restore your game and try again. If you don't do that and you fight Merv, his battle is a unique battle in the game in that it is overlaid on whatever desert screen you're already on, rather than taking you to a separate combat arena like pretty much every other fight in the game.
Okay, that's right, because it normally like goes black.
Exactly. And with the case of Merv, he just comes down to the screen, you just start the fight right there.
For some reason, if you fight the griffin, then the animation of the griffin dying somehow disables collision.
When you beat him, if you leave the screen by leaving at an edge rather than any of the floor triggers, like the top of the sand dune, for example, you retain no clip.
Okay, back up a second. Let's talk about screen transitions. If you hit a screen edge, you'll transition in that direction. There are also scripts to move you over the dunes, and crossing over the dunes next to the mountains removes the no-clip. If only runners had a way to slide past triggers.
Start turning your character and cast a spell while turning and moving. He'll cast a spell and sort of slide past any sort of triggers in the room, including that sand dune trigger.
That's right, our old friend, turning isn't walking or spell sliding. Kane was able to keep no clip and go north, and then
I wrong warped to Shapir, the actual plaza inside of Shapir.
So, wait, what? We need to talk more about how the desert works.
The developers, the Coles, wanted to put a big desert in the game, something that is so big that you literally could not walk across it. So the desert is big enough that it basically separates the two main cities in the game by thousands and thousands of screens. So much so that you would never have enough water to make the trip. It's 8,000 screens. And most of those are just the same screen with different things on it, like cactuses and rocks and such.
Each screen in the game is a room. That's what the engine calls it. For example, the inn is room 100. The magic shop is room 250. There are some rooms in the desert, like the Oasis, but most of the desert is made up of pseudo-rooms. They aren't really different rooms, even though they look like it. What that means is that the game needs to keep track of your position in the desert.
Where you are in the desert is dictated by an equation, essentially. When you go left and right, when you go west and east, you go negative or +1 desert room. But if you go north and south, you go negative and +1,000 desert rooms.
Seems straightforward. But there's a quirk to this. If the desert room number goes into the negatives. For instance, let's say that you're in desert room 1230. Go north, subtract 1,000, you're in desert room 230. Go north again, subtract another 1,000, and you're in room -770. The game then sends you to real room 770, which is the opening credits. When you go to a negative desert room, the game sends you to the positive real room equivalent. Here's another example if that's still not clear. Let's say you're on desert room 1180. If you could go north twice, then that would be desert room -820. The game would then send you to real room number 820, which is the cutscene at the end of the game. The only problem is you can't do that because there are mountains in the way. At least you can't do that normally.
So if we can get past the physical barrier of the rocks and get to the north bit of the screen, we can go up and we can start going to negative numbers.
And suddenly the game was blown wide open.
Runners could now head to the desert, run west, kill Merv, spell glide over the sand dunes, no clip through the mountains, and wrong warp to the end of the game. On December 30th, 2023, davidtki would be the first to post a run with this new strat. The new time was 2:23.
So now the question was, well, how can you fight Merv the Griffin reliably? And the answer is you just kind of can't. Suddenly the any percent run is heavily RNG based. It's just how often can you hit him in combat. It's a die roll. You're just hoping to hit him.
SantaClaus would hit back the next day with the world's first sub-2-minute time, a 1:58. In a slight change, he would get the Merv fight over first because that's where all the RNG is. He would also sleep until night before running to the desert.
Santa figured out that I think the loading speed of the desert screens went just a little bit faster at night, and it adds up.
Runners would also run left at the very top of the screen. This is faster because less of your character's sprite has to be drawn. Runners still had to contend with random desert encounters, though. The monsters, it seems, don't care about gravity. SwimFan would take the world record with a 1:49 on January 1st. 6 hours later, Santa would take it back with a 1:30, and SwimFan struck back again 2 days later with a 1:29. He had gotten a really fast Merv fight, one that would be difficult to beat. But wouldn't it be nice if runners could skip the Merv fight altogether?
And then Santa thought, how about turning isn't walking? How about that, old chestnut? If you do turning isn't walking at the screen's edge, then you skip the trigger that moves you to the next room, and you glide over that until you're above the screen.
You can simply spell glide diagonally north off of the final screen before the mountains, and basically if you just time it correctly, it'll just put you up to the screen you need. It skips over the mountain and brings you north. So no need to fight Merv, no need to do anything but have a spell or even throw a rock. Like you literally need no special stats or items to do this.
On January 13th, 2024, Santa earned a 1:23 and spent the next 2 weeks optimizing it until on January 30th, he earned a 1:13. Do you remember how it felt to discover this thing that just blew the whole run apart?
I'm gonna say top 5 of my life. yeah, probably. Because my wedding, something. This is up there. No, I felt amazing. I felt like I was encountering buried treasure. It's too good to be true that you can use this to go to any place in the game. So yeah, I don't know. I felt amazing. My heart was beating. I was very excited to tell everybody on the server, and I excitedly explained to my wife, and she was like, yeah, okay, sure. Did you take out the trash? I'm like, no, I found this. So, I don't know. It's magical.
And that was it. The game that we spent so long just wading through, it was just broken horribly. It's just destroyed now.
But that wasn't it, because just as I was finishing this video, Kane decided to get a 1:11. 2 seconds faster than Santa's world record. And apparently, it's pretty good.
1:11 is an amazing run. There's basically 2 things Kane added, aside from just being enormously skilled and persistent. There's the utterly loony, sub-frame perfect full-speed turn he does, which I knew existed, but wasn't sure how to do. And there's his mouse setup for the first end glide, which is a genius discovery, but an incredibly precise and painful one.
Okay, back up. What's going on here? Remember, for the majority of the speedrun, you're sprinting across the desert. Running at the top of the screen is faster because the game doesn't have to draw as much of your character. To get to the top of the screen, runners need to slide over the dune trigger. To do that, they need to cast a spell in the middle of turning. Remember, turning isn't walking. Casting a spell in the middle of turning isn't difficult on slower speeds, but, going slow is kind of the opposite of what you want in a speedrun. So, how difficult is spell gliding on the fastest speed setting? How many frames of turning do you think there are?
One frame.
So, how do you catch that frame?
The idea is that you press the key to open the parser, wait for several frames, and then press the left mouse button. You'll cue the parser to run, then start turning around just before the parser opens. But there are some complications. First is, whenever you press a key, the game waits between 1 and 5 frames before it outputs that key. That's because keyboard input is only processed every 10th of a second, which is about a 6-frame interval. And you have no way of knowing how many frames will pass before the parser opens. Second, remember how the cursor repositions to the bottom right corner after every transition? We need to be clicking near the top left for the trick to work, and you have about 0.1 second to drag the cursor over there. Good luck, shithead! So, in order to get the trick to work, you have to press a key to open the parser, wait a random amount of frames, and then precisely 1 frame before that random amount of time has elapsed, you have to click the mouse button while you're moving the cursor frantically across the screen.
Sounds easy, huh? So easy, in fact, that 95% of the runs die here. And that's if you're as good as Kane. Kane also developed a more consistent setup for the end of the run. You have to transition from running across the sky to the mountains, and then glide past the edge trigger. Earlier runs used the keyboard and had to reposition the character. But Kane found a mouse setup to enter at the screen's edge, right where he needed to be. This also cut down on the number of screens he had to glide across.
That's it.
Kane makes it look easy, but it's precise and tricky, as SantaClaus told me.
I'm glad Kane got the 111, so I'm not tempted to. The 111 might be the first eternal record in Sierra Gaming. I don't see it getting broken without something new.
Which, of course, meant that 2 days later, Kane dropped the record by another second. He got a faster spell glide to start with, and used a better setup for the final glides.
Got it. That's it. That's game. That's it. It's done. It's over. I don't have to worry about this category anymore.
At the end of it all, the Desert Wrong Warp had truly changed everything. But the Desert Warp wasn't just useful for skipping to the end credits in the any percent category.
The goal was to find a way to get past the Raseir wait. What they ended up doing was finding a way to skip everything. So they found what they were looking for, but found way more than they were looking for.
The most fun thing for me was, you could wrong warp back to the intro cutscene and change classes. How many points can we get that way?
And yeah, if you look closely after this wrong warp, you'll see that this is actually the introduction, but I could just press a button to skip it, and we're gonna go be a thief now.
So, for me, the Desert Warp isn't so much a way to shrink down any percent, although it's very good for that. It's all the things that are open. The whole world is open to me. I can do whatever I want. I am a master of this game. This game is under my complete control.
So this will wrong warp me to the Eternal Order of Fighters, and he's going to flop over instantly because this is a stamina battle, but for some reason, if there was a monster already chasing you, his stamina initializes to 0.
So, yes, Santa has the any percent record right now. It's 1 minute 13 seconds. Phenomenal time. But I have what I call the super 100% record, which is a funny name for a category, but it's a category that beats the game with 668 points rather than 550.
The warp was also useful in the regular 100% category. And if you really want to run it the old way, there's always the any percent no wrong warps category. My point is that sometimes people worry about speedrun techniques ruining a game, but I found that in most cases, speedrunning enlarges, glorifies the game, instead of reducing it.
This was my least favorite of the 5 whenever I started. Because I've done the speedrun for it now, and because I understand the game better, I love it. It fights for the top spot. And not because of the text, just because I appreciate everything that they did in this game.
I want to keep experiencing these games, and this is a way to keep it fresh.
I know that most of the any percent history is Santa and I battling it out, but we really need to acknowledge the contributions of Mr. P.R. Miller and C-Square. C-Square worked on the task, but Mr. Miller was the one who discovered log skip and did the initial any percent speedruns and helped with the tasks. And then Canecraft took an initial breaking of the games and broke them wide open, but SwimFan was the one who took that deep diving to its logical conclusion and figured out how to basically control everything. It takes a community to make a speedrun. At the end of the day, we may be competing against each other, but more than anything, we're competing against the game.